So hello everyone and welcome back to the Paul Carroll Sport Podcast, coming very late on this Thursday, the 2nd of April 2026. This week, a bit of a different podcast this week. We're not going to be looking back on any Tipperary senior hurling matches. We're going to be looking back on the first two rounds of the Under-20 Hurling Championship. Tipperary with 2 wins from 2, but some of the performances have left a bit to be desired, which we'll go down through, and we'll go down through a lot of listener comments that have come in regarding the performances. But 2 wins from 2 from there, we'll talk about that. We'll reflect back on the county championship draws in hurling and football that were made this evening, and I'll give my thoughts on that. And we'll have a little bit of a look ahead to the minor championship, which gets underway on Friday evening, and little bits to catch up on as well regarding injuries to the some of the senior players and what's to come as well next week, on a bit of a special podcast next week. So we'll talk about all that on this week's podcast. So hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new. It's all free, and yeah, that's pretty much all we'll say at the start. We'll get straight into it with the under-20s who defeated, if I can get my camera up here, who defeated Waterford yesterday, 16 points to 15, full-time score in front of just shy of 2,000 people in Friarfield and Dungarvan. 16 points to 15, full-time score. The type of game it was. It wasn't a classic for sure. There was 11 points to 10 at half time. Tipperary were in the lead, playing against the wind in the first half, and it was a strong breeze down in Dungarvan. But then second half, Tipperary playing with the breeze, didn't register a score for the first 10, 12 minutes of that second half, and then get a black card for Ewan Murray around the 40th minute, and Paddy McCormick in goals pulls off a brilliant save from the penalty. And Tip were really on the ropes at that stage, and Waterford had got back level. I think Waterford might have gone into the lead maybe in that second half. They certainly got it back level, and Tipperary got a couple of points. Oisin O'Donoghue stepped up with a big point, and Cormac Fitzpatrick got a big score as well to put Tip 2 in the lead. And Waterford got it back to within a point, had a chance to level it deep in injury time. The shot goes wide, it comes back for the free central position just outside the 45. Unfortunately, from a Tipperary point of view, it was Mark Hartley, the number 12 for Waterford, who was only put on the frees late in the game. That was his first proper free that he had taken. He took a 21-yard free that he tapped over the bar, but first proper free he took all game, because the free taker, David Comerford, was substituted maybe about 5 minutes to go before the 60th minute. So first free of the day for Mark Hartley, and it was a free to level the game, and he hit it wide. So Tip were really let off the hook. They'd done some really good passages of play. I think you might have already seen that clip of Stephen Tobin's point where Jamie Ormond sprays it over to the far side of the field to Cormac Fitzpatrick, and Fitzpatrick sprays it back across the field straight into the hand of Stephen Tobin on the run and put it over the bar. And I think I referred to the 3 lads in the full forward line as sticksmen at the start of this under-20 championship, and that was the purest example of it. Just pure stick passing across the field and a great finish over the bar from Stephen Tobin. So there was periods of good play from Tipperary, but there's no hiding away. There's a lot of people upset with the style of the play, the way that second half in particular played out. Tipperary playing with the breeze. Fair enough, they were down to 14 men for a 10-minute period with that black card to Ewan Murray, but even when they had the 15, there were sometimes I was looking up the pitch and either Oisin O'Donoghue or Cormac Fitzpatrick, more so Cormac Fitzpatrick, was all on his own up inside the 14-yard line with 2, 3 Waterford men around him at times, and just made it very difficult. Like, you look at that Tipperary team and you'll see it on the screen in front of you if you're watching on YouTube. The forward line: Owen Doohan, Oisin O'Donoghue, David Costigan, Jamie Ormond, Stephen Tobin and Cormac Fitzpatrick. Like, those are some really top quality forwards, and I've been actually really, really impressed with Cormac Fitzpatrick, as I have been last year. If you're a long-time listener of the podcast, I had him in my team of the year for the senior club championship last year. I've been really impressed with him, but he's been really, really good for the under-20s this year. So you have good forwards there that surely, from my outside view looking in, just play them up in the forwards and hit the ball into him. That's obviously very simplified, and there needs to be more tactics than that, but sometimes maybe there doesn't need to be. I just thought there was times there where we had 7 players between the 2 65s and very crowded back down the field. And I know Waterford had Joe McDonnell kind of sweeping, and he had a very good game for Waterford, but you have to put the other team on the back foot, I think, when you have those quality forwards. Like, if you had even a 2-3 man inside forward line, a combination of any of those six forwards. Maybe David Costigan is a more of a half forward and midfielder working out the field than he is up top, let's say. But if you had a combination of those six forwards in a full forward line, playing in that position and pushed up the field, like what are the opposition defence going to do? They're going to have to push back the field and maybe drop a man back, and that will give you more space in the middle of the field, you would think. But we seem to, we have Sam Rowan dropping back and he's doing a good job at that. But I just think we haven't seen the best out of this team yet. And in fairness to them, we're sitting here, a lot of people in the county are giving out. I certainly have had a lot of messages, Twitter, Instagram, replying to my story about what to talk about on the podcast. Numerous people got onto me about just the style of play that we're playing. And despite that, we've 2 wins from 2, brilliant, top of the table in the Munster Championship after 2 rounds, with 2 games to go. So we can't complain too much. But I think maybe we're just spoiled here in Tipperary that we're giving out that the way we're winning isn't the way we want to be winning. But winning games is the most important thing. I'm never going to deny that. But there's certainly more in these players, and we haven't seen it yet. Now, the championship is young. I appreciate that a lot of these players were in with the senior panel or in with school panels and maybe haven't gelled together 100% just yet. But we would like to certainly see a better style of play and a better use of the brilliant forwards that we do have. And we've seen flashes. I was actually very impressed, particularly in the first half yesterday, with Jamie Orman's performance, because he had a quiet enough game against Cork first time out. He got the goal, which was very important, obviously, in that game. But from what we'd seen from Jamie Orman before, I thought he was quiet against Cork. But when he kind of played out the field against Waterford and was able to get on ball, and he's strong in those rucks, getting the ball off the ground, and he's plenty of class in his wrists as well, to play nice ball into the forwards and pick off a few points as well. So he was a positive. Oisín O'Donoghue's ball winning ability was very important, particularly in the first half against the wind, where balls going up into the forward line had to stick to give the defenders a chance. I felt like Paddy McCormack must have hit about 20 puckouts in the first 10 minutes of the game yesterday. So Oisín O'Donoghu's ball winning ability was extremely important, and he won a few frees. He got just a point for a finish. That was a really important point near the end of the game. But second half, he was very deep as well. So it was just, we got away with it. There's no point of saying otherwise. Waterford had 12 wides, we had 10, but some of Waterford's wides were quite poor. You reflect back on the free they had to win the game, or to draw the game, that went wide. That was a huge let-off. And of course, Paddy McCormack's big penalty save on the 42nd minute was a huge moment in the game from a David Comerford penalty after Ewan Murray got called for reckless or careless use of the hurley, whatever the official term is on that rule for a black card penalty, where the player was running through and he just carelessly swung the hurley, or whatever way that rule is worded. So that was a huge moment. Big save from Paddy McCormack. I've been impressed with him. 2 clean sheets as well from him in the first 2 games. So there's loads of positives for Tipperary. We've 2 wins from 2. We've had some players playing really to a high standard. As I said, particularly Cormac Fitzpatrick, 9 points for him. He got something similar in the first round as well. Stephen Tobin got 2 points. One like that brilliant one that we've spoken about. 2 for Jamie Ormond and 1 each for Shane Cleary, David Costigan and Oisín O'Donoghue. And just on Shane Cleary's point, he hit kind of a bad wide earlier in the second half, and the point he got was a big one that Tip needed out near the sideline, kind of just around the 45, that he had time to think about, oh God, will I go for this after missing the last one? But he backed himself and he put it over the bar. So as I said, loads of positives for Tipperary, but you'd certainly like to see a better use of the forwards we have, and a more attacking play style, really. There's no point of saying anything different. We played awfully defensive, and that's not something that the people of Tipperary that I've been in contact with are all too happy about or want to see more of. They want to see more attack in hurling. So let's see, the lads have 3 weeks off now. They're not playing Clare until the 22nd of April, which is on the Wednesday between the 2 senior games. So it's always a tricky time for the likes of an Oisín O'Donoghue, for likely going to be bouncing around the 2 panels there, with Tip playing Cork in the senior on the Sunday, then they're playing Clare at home in the under-20 on the Wednesday, and then they're away to Waterford in the under-20 on the Sunday. So that's going to be a busy week. And Stephen Tobin, I'm sure, with his performances, will be knocking on Liam Cahill's door, I'm sure, for that Munster Championship opener. So that's where the under-20s are at. I've been impressed with Ewan Murray at times. He was put on Barry Walsh, the Cork kind of danger man, in the first round, and done really well, particularly those last 10 minutes against Cork. He won a few puck outs, came out with a lot of ball. For the team itself, I think Patrick Ryan, I'd probably like to see him maybe get the nod starting. I'm a big fan of Patrick Ryan. Seen a lot of him this year, obviously with Nina CBS, but the same with Bursley last year. Very competent and confident player and can play in a number of positions. So he's someone that I'd like to see more of, and like to see more of him on the field. Not that I'd like to see more from him. I'd like to see more of him throughout the game. So that's how it's all kind of playing out. Other than that, we'll just have to wait and see how we get on in 3 weeks' time. I know next Wednesday night, Clare are playing Limerick, so we'll all have an eye on that to see what Clare are like before Tipperary play them in Thurles on the 22nd. So that's where we are with the Tipperary under-20s. We'll stay on the theme of inter-county before we look at the club draws that were made this evening. The minor team was named. I have some podcast notes written out just to keep me updated. That's going to be very small for you watching. I'll just not that you need to see my notes. There's not many notes. It's five bullet points. Under 20 reaction, listener comments. We've gone through that. Senior team injury update. So yeah, we got an update during the week about the state of the senior team. So Shawnee Kennelly, believe it's a PCL knee injury that will keep him out for, I've heard, 3 to 4 months being thrown around. I know it's been announced that he's going to be out of the Cork game, but by all accounts, from what I've heard anyway, it could be a longer spell on the sideline. So hopefully we will see Shawnee Kennelly in the Tipperary colours at some stage this year. But really a frustrating one for him, because I thought he had some brilliant appearances and cameos. Anytime he was on the field for Tipperary this year throughout the league, he was doing well, and got injured just at the very last 60 seconds, I'd say, of that game against Kilkenny. He kind of got an awkward collision. He was down on his knees, but he was able to, the ball broke to him when he was on his knees, and he popped it out to someone and it was put over the bar. I remember that anyway, but he kind of limped away from that. And yeah, that's I think the update on him. The other update was Willie Connors. So I wasn't aware that he was injured until the Tipp GA kind of released an update to us that Willie Connors is recovering from injury and should be fit and available for the Cork game. So on one hand, it's great to hear that he's fit and available, but you'd be a little bit worried that he had a lot of game time at the start of the league, but is he going to be 100% for Cork? And likewise, it's a big couple of weeks for, as we mentioned on the last podcast, the likes of Robert Doyle or Ronan Maher, Michael Breen, the lads who maybe didn't get the full whack of game time throughout the league for injury reasons and things like that. So it's a big couple of weeks for Tipperary to get fully up to speed, and we'll all have eyes on Cork and Limerick in the league final on Sunday afternoon. So other thing to mention before we get to the club draw reaction is the county minor team was announced as well. The county under-20 football team announced as well. They have a big game on Friday evening against Waterford. Win or draw for Tipperary, and that game will be enough for them. That team was actually announced just in the last half an hour as I'm recording. I think there was 2 changes. Kieran Kelly of Arvale Rovers is coming in to start, and Dylan Cotter of Thurles Gales comes back in to start. So if you look at that team for Tipperary, Oran Gahan, Dylan Cotter, Sean Griffin, Liam Freeney, a lot of big lads there. So I'll be keeping an eye on that one tomorrow. As I said, a draw or a win for Tipperary will be enough to get out of phase 1 of the Munster Under-20 Football Championship. So there's a round robin between Tip, Waterford, Limerick and Clare. Top 2 go through to join into another round robin with Cork and Kerry. So a win or a draw for Tipperary is required there tomorrow evening in Lamey Bryan for the Tipperary Under-20 footballers. The minor hurlers get their season underway on Friday evening. I'll bring up the team here. So they play Clare in FBD Semple Stadium, 7 o'clock on Friday evening. I'll be talking to James Woodlock on Across the Line on Tip FM on Friday evening at 6 o'clock. I'll also actually be talking to Brendan Cummins. I recorded a few minutes of the post-match kind of media scrum with Brendan Cummins in Fraherfield. And that's going to be on Friday evenings Across the Line as well. And I do ask him about the situation with why did we only have kind of 2 players inside the Waterford 45 for a lot of that second half, and he answered that. So you'll have to tune in to cross the line to listen to that. So I'll have Brendan Cummins, James Woodlock, and also the under-20 manager Paddy O'Gorman, and I'll be speaking to Shane Brophy as well, kind of looking at the county board draw as well. If you do want to tune in, 6 o'clock. Every Friday evening on Tipp FM is where you'll hear that. But yeah, the Tipperary minor hurling team has been named, and this is it in front of you now. You'll see it on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. We've Owen Connolly of Carrick Swan in goals, Newport's Colin Ryan, Bursaley's Daniel Groom, and the captain Connor Collins of Galtee Rovers in the full backline. James Finn of Golden Kilfeacle is at 6, with Oisin Kennedy of Newport at 5, and Travis McLaughlin of Cahir at 7. Midfield, Shane Ryan, Bursaley, and Hugo Healy of Killerone MacDonough's. And the half-forward line, Conor Kennedy of Clonouty Rossmore, Conal Morrison of Moyle Rovers, and Aina Tucker of Nina Rogue. And the full-forward line, Zach O'Keefe of Holy Cross Ballycal, Chris Dunn of Gurton Glengool, and KJ Dunn of Toomey Vara. So as far as I know, 14 of that starting 15 are up to the age, and I think KJ Dunn is the only exception there. He is a youngster, really. He's underage again next year. We saw him play with Nina CBS Harty Cup team, came on in the Harty Cup final for his debut, and played a bit in that Crow Cup semi-final. Still only a junior cert student, so these are young lads. So I've seen, particularly more so the North Tipperary lads, just from being where I'm from. I've seen a good bit of Chris Dunn as well, and I've always been impressed with Conal Morrison. Even when I've seen him, I think he was on this team last year. I've always been impressed with him. He's in high school Clonmel, I'm nearly sure, and a really fine player. Shane Ryan has been playing a lot of hurling with St. Joseph's College in Bursaley, was a star for them. Hugo Healy made big appearances for Nina CBS, particularly against Thurles CBS in that Harty Cup semi-final, so I've always been impressed with him. In terms of the defence and the goalkeeper, I haven't seen an awful lot. I know I was up in Kilcoman, Burgess GA Club's ground there last year for Burgess were playing Newport in I think it was under 15 game, and one of the Newport lads really caught my eye, and I asked someone on the sideline what was his name, and classic, I'm terrible with names, so I've forgotten what the name was, but one of them was really impressive. He was playing full forward that day, and I'm wondering, was it this Ollie Roach who's on the bench, or was it maybe one of these lads, Colin Ryan or Oisin Kennedy? But Newport have a really, really good group of young lads coming through in these under 15, under 17 ages in the last couple of years, so no surprise to see 3 Newport lads on the panel. And have seen a couple of the other players as well. Aina Tucker was very impressive with Nina CBS as well this year. So I'm going to be really interested to see how these players get on. You have to remember these are very young lads playing, but James Woodlock always has them set up well, and James Woodlock team will go hell for leather, and we wish them the very best of luck on Friday evening. So a few people wanted me to give my thoughts on that. So I'll know more about these players obviously after tomorrow evening when we really get to see them, but looking forward to it. Last year, the minor championship, there's 5 teams obviously in Munster in the minor championship, and 4 go through to the All-Ireland series. So Tipp actually missed out. Tipp finished 5th last year, but I'd say their score difference last year was probably about -5 or that. They lost 3 games by 1 score, so they were quite unlucky last year, but let's see how they get on this year, tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. But now let's have a look at the county championship draws. Very early in the day to be talking county championship, but they were made earlier today. We'll run you down through. This is the football one. So actually with the football, with the intermediate and with the senior, really, I'm not sure exactly what the format is. I think it's the top 2. There's 3 groups of 4. I think it's the top 2, the best 2 group winners, let's say. So score difference and points and all that accounted for. I think they go through to a semi-final, and then actually I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure looking at that now, because they've been a lot of reform with the football championship the last couple of years. They're trying to balance the groups, and a lot of teams getting relegated just to get the numbers in each grade that the county board wants. So they've been changing it every year, so I'll have to catch up with Fergal MacDonald and Anthony Shelley and some of the lads in the football board to fully get a grasp of what way it's working out this year. But that's the intermediate football draw in front of you there. Group 1, Cahir, Rockwell Rovers, Éire Óg, Anacarty and Feathered. Group 2, Killinall, Clonmel Commercials, Mine Temple Toohey and Clonmel Oak. And Group 3, Arvale Rovers, Golden Kilfeacle, Galtee Rovers and Moycarkey Borough. So a lot of teams will be looking to get back up senior. Do you know, I think was Care relegated last year. I know Killinall were relegated last year. And was it Arvale Rovers as well that got relegated last year? So a lot of teams there will be eager to get up. And then you have Clonmel Oak coming up from the Premier Junior grade. So that is the Intermediate Football Championship. Next, we have the Senior Football Championship. So I feel there's a couple, and you'll notice this when we get to the hurling as well. There's a couple of teams that I think play each other every year, and in the senior football, it's Clonmel Commercials and Ballina. I think they've played each other every year since Ballina have come up senior. Group 1, Clonmel Commercials, defending champions, Ballina, Aherlow and Ardfinnan in Group 1. Group 2, another two teams that seem to always play each other, Kilsheal and Kilcash and JK Brackens, Ballyporeen and newcomers Thurles Sarsfields are in that group, Group 2. And Group 3, Lockmore Castleiney, Upperchurch Drumban, Moyle Rovers and Grange Moakler Ballyneal. That's a tasty enough group now in the football championship. Nearly every team will fancy their chances in there of having a crack at getting out. So that is the football championship. Football championship gets underway the first weekend of August, and the hurling starts on the final weekend of July. So let's hope they're even pushed out and maybe start later like they did last year. That means Tipp are going well in the inter-county. But looking at the Intermediate Hurling Championship draw now, so last year's beaten finalists Knockavilla, Doneski, Kickham's in a group there with Kilsheal and Kilcash, Portroe and Clonalty's second team. So that's an interesting group now, because Portroe this year have Liam Sheedy with them. They've had a really good start to the league. So Liam Sheedy in there with his brother John over the team. They'll get every ounce out of all those Portroe players, and they should be in good fettle for this year. And the Knockavilla Doneski Kickham's beaten in the final last year, looking to go one more. And Kilsheal and Kilcash are always really, really good at this intermediate grade and got to the football final last year, if you remember. Group 2, Clonakilty, who dropped down from the Premier Intermediate grade, join Arvale Rovers, Shannon Rovers and Carrick Davins. So an interesting enough group there. I feel Arvale Rovers and Shannon Rovers played each other. I'm not sure were they in the same group or played each other in a preliminary quarter final or something. I'm nearly sure they played each other last year, but Clonakilty dropping back down will look to be going back up. Kappa White and Ballingarry have been thereabouts in the last couple of years as well at this grade. They'll fancy probably getting out of this Group 3 with Holy Cross Ballycahill, who are up from Junior A, and we all know the talent that is in the Holy Cross Ballycahill club at the minute. And they've been on an upward trajectory at both their first team and their second team. Now they're up at the intermediate grade with their second team, so they'll be definitely game opponents for everyone in this group. And Skeena Rinky as well have proved tricky down through the years. I think they had did have a poor year last year, but got stayed in the grade anyway. Group 4, Bursacane, Moyle Rovers, Ballybacon and Newport. So Bursacane had a fine year last year. Moyle Rovers were new up last year and caused a couple of upsets and done very well last year. So it'll be interesting to see how they get on. Ballybacon Grange, the ever-present Ballybacon Grange at the intermediate grade are there, and Newport as well, as they look to kind of continue maybe a bit of a transition in the club. As I mentioned, all those good young lads coming through for Newport. So interesting intermediate grade. The grade, we're lucky in Tipperary, the grades are always, like even when we get to the senior draw and the Premier Intermediate, they're always so hard to call, I think anyway. Particularly at this time of the year, but it's going to be a great championship when it does roll around. Up to the Premier Intermediate draw now, and some brilliant groups and some really interesting groups here. Group 2 is basically a South Championship with Thurles Sarsfields, and Group 3 is an All-North Championship, which my own club Burgess are involved in. So we'll get through these, but we'll start with Group 1. Gartnahoe Glengool, obviously beaten semi-finalists last year. Silvermines in there, Moyne Temple Toohey and Sean Tracy's. So looking at that, you think Gartnahoe are probably primed to come out of that group as you look at it now. But Moyne Temple Toohey have sprung upsets, and Sean Tracy's had a good year last year, and Silvermines will fancy their chances with their young team a year older now as well. So that's going to be an interesting group. Group 2, this is the South Championship with Thurles Sarsfields. So Carrick Swan, Killinall, St Mary's and Thurles Sarsfields. I'm nearly sure Carrick Swan, Killinall and St Mary's were in the same group last year. So it's basically the same group. And who was the odd one out last year? I'm trying to think what was the other team in that group. I'm nearly sure Carrick Swan, Killinall and St Mary's were in the same group last year. And who was with them now as I look at the other teams here? The team that got relegated last year sure was, who did we say got relegated? Laura. They were, no, sorry, not Laura. They were relegated from senior. Clonakilty. I don't think Clonakilty were in that group, were they? Mine Temple Tuohy, were they in that group? I don't think so. No, I think Mine Temple Tuohy and Gorton who actually were in the same group last year. So who was that other? There's someone probably shouting at the screen now. Who was the odd one out last year? But anyway, they're in the same group again. They'll be playing each other in the South Championship. They'll be sick of seeing each other. Carrick, Swan, Kilnall, and St Mary's. But on the balance of things, very tight group again. Carrick, Swan, back-to-back losses in finals, so they'll be looking to get back there again and go that extra step. Group 3, as I said, Malone Burgess, we're in there with Temple Derry, who beat us in the relegation semi-final last year. Moneygall, who we played in the North Championship and the County Championship last year, and Lura, of course, who we've had plenty of run-ins with in the last kind of 5 years across the grades as they drop back down from senior now. So the North Premier Intermediate Championship is going to be really tight. You've those 4 teams. You have the reigning champions Ballina, and you have Silvermines as well. So again, we're going to be sick of seeing each other, but it makes travelling to these games, they're all going to be probably in Nina or Toom or Dolla is where all these games are going to be playing. So that's one positive, but really exciting championship to look forward to. Group 4, Borlahan, Douala, Ballina, Aero, Gannacarthy and Golden Kilfeacle. So again, you've 3 teams in a close enough range. You know, Borlahan are a mid team, but they wouldn't be far away from the likes of Golden, and not sure about the geography of Aero, Gannacarthy, but Borlahan and Golden wouldn't be a million miles away. And Ballina in that group as well. Ballina had that very young team last year, won the North Championship, and they're all a year older as well. So they're another team that seem to be on the up. So really looking forward to this Seamus O'Reen Championship. And then we get to the main event, the County Senior Hurling Championship. And look at these groups. I can't wait for it already. But Holy Cross Ballycal in Group 1 alongside Killer 1 McDonough's, Thurles Sarsfields and Upper Church Drumban. So Holy Cross beaten semi-finalists last year in there against 2022 champions Killer 1 McDonough's, Thurles Sarsfields. Missed out on the group stage, on getting out of the group stages last year on a 1 point in points difference against Cashel. Do you remember that game down in Holy Cross? So they'll be looking to bounce back, and they'll have a couple of new additions to the team. The likes of you'd imagine a Ewan Murray will be one that they'll be looking to get into their first team, I'm sure, and Kieran Roster as well, and some of these lads coming through for Thurles. So and they'll look to hit the ground running. And Upper Church Drumban, who come up from the Premier Intermediate grade, and they're the All-Ireland Intermediate Hurling Champions, lest we forget, and now managed by Mick Ryan, the 2016 All-Ireland winning manager and Upper Church man himself. So they'll be looking to fly back up the ranks in the senior grade, and be really interesting to see how they get on in the top grade. But that is a brilliant group, some really good games there. And when you think of past meetings, Killer 1 and Thurles Sarsfields, do you remember that game? God, I don't know how long ago it is now, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, where Ronan Maher got a late goal up in Nina. He pushed up the field for Thurles late on and got a brilliant goal up at the scoreboard end in Nina to win that game late on against Killer 1. So they'll meet again. Group 2 is a group that is really hard to call. You've Lockmore Castellini, who are going for 3 in a row, and Moycarkey Bursalee and Clonalty Rossmore. So I feel like Clonalty have always nearly been in one of these groups of death every year. A real tough group to get out of, and they're in one again. Bursalee, it's actually I can't remember exactly. It's a long time since they've gotten out of their group, as far as I remember. All this now is right at the back of my head. I'm in inter-county mode at the minute, but I'm nearly sure Bursalee have always kind of missed out on getting out of the group narrowly in the last 3 or 4 years, I believe. So they'll be looking to finally get back out into knockout hurling in the County Senior Hurling Championship, but it's not going to be easy. Clonalty Rossmore, Moycarkey Burris and Lockmore Castellini in their group. Group 3, Drummond Inch, Cashel, Kincormacs, Roscrea and Killadangan. Again, you'd probably look at Roscrea as being the weakest of those teams, but Cashel, Drummond Inch, Killadangan will all fancy themselves getting out, and Roscrea have been Do you remember that game down in Templemore last year, Ross Gray? They missed a free late on and they could have sprung an upset. Was that against? Was it against my Carricky? I'm trying to think of who it was against last year, but they'll be fit and ready to go come late July as well. And Drummond Inch looking to capitalise on the good year they had last year, getting to the semi-finals, and Cashel now settled at the senior grade, and a lot of young players coming through a year older as well. So, and Killadangan, of course, have always been, they've been in how many county finals in the last decade, and still have all those brilliant hurlers still playing with them. So they'll be looking to get back to where they feel they belong, right at the back end of the County Senior Hurling Championship. So that's a really interesting group as well. And Group 4, Nina Rogue, Toomey Vara, JK Brackens, and CJ Kickham's Mullinahone. I mentioned some of those teams that always seem to play each other, and I feel like Nina and Mullinahone have played each other an awful lot in the last few years. And even JK Brackens and Toom, were they in the same group last year? Did they play a game in Bursley last year? I'm trying to think back, but Nina and Toom is a great kind of classic rivalry, particularly of kind of the 90s when Toom were really in their pomp, and Nina had a team that won a county final as well. So that's always a tasty rivalry. And JK Brackens, we've seen them kind of been right thereabouts, and then just not get over the line maybe in some late knockout games, and they've started county championships really well, and we all know the talent they have, but so they'll be looking to push on again. And Mullinahone are just one of those teams really hard to beat every year in this grade, so it'll be interesting to see how they get on. And that is the County Senior Hurling Championship. So interesting. It's a long ways away. We've a lot of hurling to talk about on this podcast before we're talking club hurling, but it is nice to get this kind of early look at the County Senior, Premier Intermediate and Intermediate Hurling Championship, and the Football Championship as well. So not sure when divisional draws are going to be made. That's the next thing to look at. But now that you're playing these, and I think now that I think of it, some of these teams will be playing each other in the league. I know Burgess's next match is I think it's away to Lura, and we're playing Lura then in the county championship, so that adds a little bit of flavour to that league tie, which is going to be in the month of April, and we won't be seeing Lura in the county championship for another 3 or 4 months. So, but yeah, very interesting to see. So that is the county championship draw. Pity, as I've said, that it's not on Tipp FM. It would have always been on Tipp FM back through the years. Then they went and had it on the stream, remember, a couple of years ago, and that all went fine. And then there was a mishap, remember, 2 or 3 years ago, that something went wrong in the draw and they had to do it again. So they're a little bit stung, I think, from doing it live. But we've had some talks with the county board about getting it back on Tipp FM next year. So that seems to be the plan as of now. So hopefully we'll have a good live kind of broadcast of the county board draw back on Tipp FM next year, all going well. But that's pretty much it. It's a much shorter podcast this week. What are we, 33 minutes in? One thing I will mention, next week I do have a podcast already recorded, which I'll kind of do up and put out next week, and maybe we'll have a little bit of a chat about the league final maybe, and about the start of the minor championship on next week's podcast. But I already have a podcast. I've talked about it before, how I'd like to do maybe some longer form interviews on this podcast and fill up those kind of off weeks with them. So I drove down to Friarfield and Dungarvan yesterday. Ken Hogan was on co-commentary with me. I picked him up in Thurles. He's living up in Laura. I'm living here in Burgess. Met in Thurles, drove down to Dungarvan together. And on the drive back home after the match, I said to Ken, will we do an interview while we're driving up the road? And we put the mics on, and we just chatted the whole way up about Ken's life in hurling. He's a very interesting career in hurling, a All-Ireland minor winner in 1980, and talked about what it was like hurling back then, and things like getting a goalkeeper hurley back then was difficult, and then his transition into the senior team. And he had grown up with watching Tipp have very little success through the 70s and early 80s. And then, he only played with Tipp from 86, was it, or 87 to 93. But that was an incredibly fruitful couple of years for Tipperary, or 7 or 8 year period. 2 All-Irelands, 5 Munster championships. He was on the field for some, of Tipperary's best moments ever. Nicky English kicking the ball into the back of the net. Aidan Ryan's goal against Cork in the 91 Munster final replay, where there's people on wheelchairs out on the field after the goal went in and everything. We spoke about all that, and we spoke loads about, you know, even when Ken was manager, and you know, he's had a lifetime of hurling, and we talked about all that. So that's going to be out at some stage next week, to fill the void as we build towards April 19th. So that's something to look forward to. But that is going to be it for this week's podcast. If you have enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like. Comments down below as well. Any questions, I always tend to respond in the comments. And if you want to have your say on the next week's podcast, it's at P Carroll Sport on Instagram. I put up a story the day before, usually every podcast, where I ask listeners for comments. I usually have them all written out and go through them one by one. I just didn't have time this week, so a general flavour of the comments, as I mentioned earlier, were people kind of giving out about the under-20s and that sort of thing. So we've gone through all that. But that's the place to follow me if you want to have your say on the podcast, at P Carroll Sport on Twitter, on Instagram, and TikTok as well, if you want to keep up to date. So that is going to be it for this week's podcast. Like, subscribe, share the posts I put out on Twitter. That always helps us out as well. And have a good weekend, have a good Easter, and we'll catch up next week. Good luck.